I'm making a video game. This is not it. This is instead legendary influential arcade game Smash TV. You'd better get used to seeing this because I'm going to be talking about it a lot. Like, a lot. Let's talk game design. Having successfully gone from absolutely nothing to a full release on Steam with Reiterate, and if you haven't seen those videos then you should go queue up that playlist when we're done here, it's time to think about what I've tentatively called Project NBT, or Next Big Thing. Basically the thing I do next. Before we even start committing any effort at all to code or graphics or all of that other fun stuff that actually leads to a good video game, we need to settle on the most important thing of all. I've said before that because video games are a subjective art medium, the only way to know for sure if what you've made is any good is to look at what you intended to make, and then gauge how well you succeeded at doing that. Sorting out your game's intent early on also gives you a roadmap or a design pillar to help make decisions when you're deep into the process. It's basically like having a destination for a road trip, before you start pulling off into service stations and picking up hitchhikers who may or may not stab you. Now, a game's intent doesn't have to actually have anything to do with the quality of the final product. Like I said, video game quality is subjective, and measuring the quality is like trying to measure the volume of a bucket by picking up the water with your bare hands and asking it how much more there is. For example, the intent of Reiterate was to simply finish something and release it on Steam. That was the goal and purpose of that project, and in that way, it was a roaring success. So with that in mind, what is the intent behind Project NBT? When I finished up on Reiterate, as I was wrapping up all the lessons I'd learned, I said something to the effect of, I don't enjoy this game anymore. What I meant was, well, I don't enjoy the game anymore. The reason for that is that every time you play Reiterate, it's exactly the same. The levels don't change, the physics and the graphics don't change, the soundtrack, although supremely amazing, doesn't change. It's all identical on every single playthrough, and as the person who designed and made it, I'm quite familiar with it, and I'm also very tired of it. As I was arriving at this conclusion, something hit me. Over the last few years, you might have seen an increase in indie-developed roguelikes. For those who don't know, and we will cover this in more depth in a future video, a roguelike is basically a game where some degree of random generation influences the player's experience. Probably the most well-known modern example is Binding of Isaac, an isometric 2D twin-stick roguelike fashioned loosely after the original Legend of Zelda. In Isaac, every run has random levels, random item placement, random boss spawning, random everything, really, to make sure that each play session is significantly different to the one before it. The realisation I had was this: roguelikes might be popular and have a broad active audience, but I don't really think they're made for those people. I think they're made for the developer. I've got nothing to base this on other than my own personal experience, but I'm now convinced that roguelikes and games with significant random elements are made by people who want to be able to enjoy the game that they've made after they've finished making it. If you think about it, most of us get into making games because we like playing games. You know, unless you're out to make a fortune and then you go make NFT mobile games for Facebook's metaverse or something. But then you don't really count as a person. Now, if we like playing games, but the act of developing a game makes it so that we can't enjoy the game we've made, as is the case with me and Reiterate, then what do? Simple. We randomise. Having rambled on about where I think roguelikes come from, let's now circle back to the question that started this whole waffling rant in the first place. What is the intent of Project NBT? Well, that's it. It's both that simple and that hard, all at once. The goal is to make a game that, when it's done, I can still fire up and play for a bit and have a good, enjoyable time with. That's going to be the guiding principle behind everything we now go on to do. Which is good, because it means that as long as I stick to it, I'll always be making something I'm happy with. Also planned for this series is a video about how important it is to make games for yourself, rather than primarily targeting an audience. But for now, let's briefly touch on that by making this possibly controversial statement that I'll explain later. I am not aiming to please anyone but myself. If that sounds arrogant, well, hello, I'm Zane, nice to meet you, I am a golden god. But in all seriousness, what I have to think about is, I like video games, and I'd like to think I have pretty good taste. Therefore, it follows that if I make a game that is in fact to my pretty good taste, it's logical that someone else out there will also like it. I'm not a precious and unique oddity who only likes a video game that nobody else has ever heard of. My tastes will align with some people somewhere. I know this because if they didn't, I'd never have any games to play at all. So we've got an intent, a goal, a destination. But is that enough? Well, if you're looking to just make a game in a vacuum, or you're part of a team, then yes, having a strong intentional direction for your game is enough to get started. But I have other goals as well, and there's something else that I need Project NBT to achieve. When I made Reiterate, I set out to make the simplest and most basic thing I could think of, so that the goal of releasing a finished game on Steam was within reach the entire time. I kept it as small in scope as I possibly could, to give myself the best possible chance of actually succeeding, and for the most part, that worked out. Project NBT has a slightly different goal. I've now put out a game and proven to the world and to myself that yes, I can do that. Now it's time to take what I've learned and push myself a little bit further. Not a lot. We're not going straight into massively multiplayer Devil May Cry clone with farming, crafting and AAA graphics. Not today, anyway. No, instead I'm going to very carefully and actively increase the complexity underneath. Just a little bit. We're talking things like stats and values, more options, more variety in the core gameplay than just go from here to over there and try not to die. Basically, I'm going to level myself up. Just a little bit. I feel comfortable committing to that because I learned a lot from making Reiterate about what it actually takes to put out a viable commercial product. And I feel like I have a stronger grasp now on both what I need and where my limits are. That's not to say I won't be making any mistakes, just that they're going to be a whole new set of mistakes instead. Isn't that exciting? Now, I know what some of you are like, so I want to be clear right from the first episode. This is still going to be a game that is small in scope. It's not some epic sprawling thing that you'll play for 400 hours with a games as a service type DLC roadmap or anything like that. And I know I've made the mistake of mentioning Binding of Isaac, but I don't want you to think it's going to have that level of variety straight out the gate. You have to remember Isaac has had at least 3, I think, major content expansions since it first came out. And it started life as a janky flash game that Ed McMillan threw out because he was riding on the financial freedom of Super Meat Boy. I am still only one person, and I'd like to manage your expectations from the word go. This is not going to be as big as some of you might think it is, at least not at first. Maybe down the line we can look at free updates and DLC plans, but on day one it's going to have a finite list of content. It has to for my own sanity. And to get to a point where I can say yes, this is done, it is a top quality product, and I can release it and feel comfortable asking for payment for it. So please keep that in mind. So I suppose now that we are nearly 1500 words into this devlog, we should probably talk about Project NBT is going to be a top-down arcade twin-stick arena shooter with roguelite elements. If that sounded like a lot of buzzwords and something you'd see printed on some box art, then yes, it is. Let's break it down. Top-down refers to the camera direction, and it means that you're at the top, looking down. It's technically going to be isometric, but getting bogged down in the technical definitions of words like that doesn't actually help anyone other than those really tedious people who have to start 6-hour-long arguments on Twitter. So don't worry about it. Arcade is an even more nebulous word that to me represents the philosophy behind the primary gameplay loop. Arcade games are simple to understand and quick to pick up, with enough complexity that they take a lot of mastery later on, so that you'll stand there pumping cash into them until you're poor. The arcade distinction is important because there's a few roguelite indie games like Slay the Spire or FTL that really don't have that easy to understand philosophy behind them and throw you into the complexity as quickly as they can. Project NBT will not be that. Twin Stick Arena Shooter is where we go back to the start of the video and I remind you that you're going to be seeing a lot of Smash TV. I'll have another video on the importance and brilliance of the genre later on, but although Smash TV didn't invent the twin stick shooter, it is to me the most legendary of them all. It also happens in a literal physical arena inside a TV studio, which is something I'll talk about another day so that you can see what I mean by both twin stick, as in you move and aim primarily with 2 sticks, and arena shooter, as in you're in an arena and you shoot things, with roguelite elements. I don't have the time right now to explain the difference between roguelikes, which aren't always meaningfully like the game Rogue that they're based on, and roguelite. But all you need to know really is that between each play session or run, some progress of some type will carry over. I have a plan for that already, but the best example is something like Hades, which is another game you're going to get sick of seeing as we move forward with this series. In Hades, although you die a lot and restart from the beginning, you carry certain things with you permanently, so that you can make permanent, meaningful upgrades for the next run, and so on. Project NBT will have something like this, although it won't actually be permanent, but because you can carry things between runs, it's still technically a roguelite. You know what, it's kind of complicated, we'll get to that later. It'll also have a small but crucial amount of another roguelite element, random generation. This is also going to require its own video, and given how many individual videos I'm going to need, I feel like I'm just listing a contents page for a book that I haven't written yet. But the brief summary is that it won't be procedurally generated, and it's not going to be randomized to the degree that Binding of Isaac is. The plan is to use random generation as a kind of seasoning in the carefully prepared meal that is the final product. And it's this part that will be most crucial because it's how I'll succeed at the intent that I set out earlier. This is where the automated variety will come from that hopefully makes a game that when it's done, I can still enjoy playing, hopefully. I mentioned Ed McMillan earlier, and I think what we're doing here is following what I call the McMillan career path, which goes something like successful 2D platformer, experimental self-serving top-down roguelike, weird bejeweled clone that nobody understands, 96 more expansions for the aforementioned roguelike. Ed, if you ever see this, I'm just kidding. I love you. Right, we've covered what it is I want to make, and we've laid out our path to get there, including, I think, the next 6 months worth of videos. So I think it's about time we start with a... Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and however else you choose to self-identify, allow me to introduce to you Project NBT. Well, what were you expecting? I don't know if you know this, viewer, but this is how most video games start out life. A little square moving around a screen, to make sure that underneath, everything works. What's most important here is that I get the basic movement correct. As part of the gameplay, there will be things that affect your movement speed, so I need to make sure the basic speed is good and feels good to do. If I can get that right, the game will immediately be good to play, because it'll feel good to play, and that will be good. Yes, good. This part doesn't look very glamorous, but it's one of the most important things that you can do. You know how they say that every journey begins with just a single step? Imagine if you didn't look where you were going on that first step and tripped over and then fell face first into a river full of alligators. It'd be a lot harder to complete your journey then, wouldn't it? This is me trying to not fall into a river full of alligators. You know, metaphorically. Now, as simple as this looks, it actually already has a fair amount of complexity underneath. For example, it already works with a controller, which for a twin-stick shooter is sort of important. You kinda need some sticks. There's also a mouse and keyboard option, which will be familiar to anyone who's played something like Hotline Miami on PC, and the basics of a dash or dodge system that I'm still playing with. What I need to decide here, and the current state of where I stopped development, is how much invincibility to give the player during a dash, how many dashes the player should have, what the reset timer should be for the dash, and a lot of other boring variables that make up the bulk of an intrinsically important part of the entire thing. The dash, in fact, is sort of this game's equivalent of something that I dealt with a lot during Reiterate, Coyote Time. It's the degree to which I give the player an advantage over their environment, and I need to balance how much superiority the player can have before I can even think about challenging them. Basically, we're at the point where if I get this wrong, as boring as it looks, everything else afterwards will never be right ever, no matter what I do. I've also already made a conscious choice about the camera system. As you can see, the arena you're in is locked to the centre of the screen, and you don't scroll around when you move. I did originally start with a version where the camera followed the player like in Hotline Miami, but that would have led to a couple of difficult situations where enemies might be firing from off screen, and I'd need to find an elegant way of providing the player with information for things they can't see. The most elegant solution, as it turns out, was to just not do that at all. Again, smash TV. So you're going to have to trust me that it's okay that the game currently resembles something from the Atari 2600. You're going to have to be okay right now with looking at a little green square moving around a black screen. Because if this green square isn't good, then the entire game is doomed before we've even started. And on that dramatic bombshell, it is time to end. I've given you a lot of information, I've probably confused a lot of you, and I've actually made very little. But that's okay. It's day one of I don't know how many, and we've taken our first important step in the journey. Hopefully we haven't already fallen into a river full of alligators. Please like this video if you liked this video, and subscribe for more videos like the video you just liked since you liked it. Pop into our Discord if you want, and you can see me updating and regressing Project NBT in real time. And then make sure you come back for the next episode where, if you're very lucky, I might even have 2 squares. Gasp. But that'll be the next time, when I'll be saying, hey, let's talk game design.